I thought we'd start with the subject of your latest book. I think it's fair to say that the one thing that unites the average Pakistani and the average American is that they don't like each other's countries very much. Is this divide between Pakistan and America unbridgeable?
I mean, it's unbridgeable if it comes to friendship or, any kind of true alliance. But on the other hand, policymakers on both sides do know how much the two countries need each other. The United States will need Pakistan much less after it withdraws from Afghanistan, because the single most important thing that Pakistan does for America is to provide supply routes for the American and allied forces in Afghanistan. Without those Pakistani supply routes, America would have to develop relations with regimes in Central Asia, which are just as problematical in different ways, and also make major concessions to Russia. So that's one major way in which Pakistan helps the US. And then in general, I mean, Americans do tend to forget that while Pakistan has been very unhelpful in certain ways to the United States when it comes to fighting Islamist extremism, above all by providing shelter for the leadership of the Taliban, when it comes to actual attacks on the United States itself or on the West, terrorist attacks on Britain, Europe, Australia, Pakistan has actually been pretty helpful. This, well, shall we say, murky question of bin Laden notwithstanding.
You see this gathering storm on both sides of Congress calling for America to cut its losses and withdraw aid. Completely overstated response?
Well, I think not after, as I say, after America withdraws from Afghanistan. But then, this is very much what America did in the 80s as well. As soon as it lost interest in fighting the Soviets in Afghanistan, or the Soviets withdrew, it pulled out, cut its aid, went home again. I mean, that's also one thing which is principally responsible for the level of distrust of America in Pakistan.
Talking about distrust of Pakistan, Lawrence Wright in the New Yorker magazine points out that it's curious and ironic that, given that the Americans have been funding Pakistan all these years, since the 1950s arguably, Pakistan today is arguably the most anti-American state in the world. How do you account for that?
Well, the key thing is that they didn't fund them in the 90s. As soon as the Soviets left and the Cold War ended, America lost all interest in helping Afghanistan, helping Pakistan. And not just that, but you saw more and more of an America tilt towards India. So the Pakistanis have some legitimate grounds, for anger there. Then again, I mean, even during the Cold War, the relationship was not really a very close or trusting one. The Pakistanis allege American betrayal in the wars of 1965 and 71 against India, but then Pakistan got into those wars without consulting the United States. So, it's never been a truly good relationship.
Anatole, in your book, your central thesis, contrary to the conventional wisdom in the West, is that Pakistan is not a failed state. Explain what you mean by that, or not a failing state.
Well, I've worked in truly failed and failing states. Compared to Afghanistan in the 90s, even in many ways Afghanistan today, Chechnya in the 1990s, Somalia, Congo, Pakistan is still a state that functions as a state. It's a deeply troubled one. Secondly, although a large number of Pakistanis have some sympathy with Islamic fundamentalism. I mean, Islamic fundamentalism comes in many, many different forms. That's not the same as saying that they actually support a revolution in their own country. The political elites are, by definition, opposed to revolution, and the Pakistani army, when it comes to fighting rebels against Pakistan, is actually pretty strong and effective. Of course, it does nothing to stop the Afghan Taliban.
But Pakistan hardly has what we call a representative democracy or even a proper legal system. Does that alter your thinking about its prospects in terms of becoming a more viable nation-state?
Well, the thesis of my book is that Pakistan can probably survive, but that there are massive obstacles to it prospering or developing. And some of the things which hold it together, like the rule of these conservative elites, are also the things which stop it from developing, because these elites live and maintain their support by plundering the state and distributing that patronage to their followers.
Yeah, you talk about threats to Pakistan as a nation-state. Climate change and American ground troops, explain.
Well, climate, I mean, the thing is, even before climate, you factor in climate change. The worrying thing is, even without that, the water statistics for Pakistan, combination of population, water, and appalling levels of wastage, mean that Pakistan is going to be in really serious trouble in the decades to come. Now, if you add to that the unforeseen, but obviously very dangerous consequences of climate change, you can see a situation in which it will be water shortages, above all, which would tip Pakistan over into collapse. I mean, that's some decades away still, so there is time to do things about this. My worry is that the Pakistani state as it presently exists will not be capable of doing those things.
US ground forces?
Well, that's simply because the Pakistani army shares the anti-Americanism of the mass of the population. They hate it when they go home and their neighborhoods, even their own families ask them, why are you acting as slaves of the Americans? Why are you taking American money to kill your own people? Now, the discipline of the Pakistani army is in fact extremely strong. But if we see American forces coming in on the ground, there will be a great many Pakistani soldiers, irrespective of the orders of their commanders, who will feel a duty to fight. Now, obviously, I mean, that is a hideously dangerous situation.
Let's bring in China here. The conventional wisdom says that the most important issue for Sino-American relations in order to maintain a peace and stability is the Korean Peninsula, but you would argue that it's more about the affairs of Afghanistan and Pakistan. Why?
Well, that's not clear yet, and China is pursuing a pretty cautious policy in that part of the world. But it could well become so in future. Because Pakistan, when you think about it, is really China's only ally in the world. It's a great weakness of China's, growing power, the fact that it has no reliable allies. And the Chinese have already made clear that in the last resort they will back up Pakistan. They will compensate for America's aid. I mean, that doesn't mean that they want to plunge into the place and replace America. China's also made the biggest commercial investment in Afghanistan, in the Ainak copper mine. So I think you can see a situation in which China will become more and more involved in that.
But China is by no means unconditionally committed to Pakistan. I mean, it must be very wary about the nature of its Islamist insurgencies and the capacity that it could threaten or expand and threaten China, which has its own problems with Islamic insurgencies.
Well, it does. But Pakistan is important to China from 2 points of view. I mean, the first is balancing against India, which China sees the growing American-Indian alliance as a real threat. The second is that by the same token, Pakistan is important as a reserve energy route to China, only as a reserve, because shipping oil across the Hindu Kush mountains is not an option that one would want if one had any others. But they are trying to build Pakistan up, just in case you get into a situation where the Indians and the Americans threaten China's sea lanes, then Pakistan could be important.